in person. So the location plan for the exits and the assembly points on the doors. On discovering the fire, please carry out the following: sound the alarm, tap the fire if possible and safe to do so, using the appliances provided. On hearing the evacuation signal, please carry out the following: exit the building for your nearest safest exit. We've got one at the back. All visitors report to assembly point G. All staff report to the designated assembly point on Walpack Way car park. Do not leave the assembly point for any reason until to do so by the incident controller or fire brigade officer. And I would imagine our incident controller is Sue tonight, is it? Oh, supposed to. Just so you know. Okay. So hopefully we won't need that, but just in case. So apologies for absence and members on official business. I've got a list here, I've got quite a few. Councillor Gosling, apologies, substituted by Councillor Parsons, welcome. Councillor Parker, Councillor Clues, welcome. Councillor Smith, substituted by Councillor Hancock, again, welcome. Councillor MacDonald, substituted by Councillor Moss, thank you, welcome. And Councillor Marion Humphreys, substituted by Councillor Andy Wright. So welcome to all those people that are not usually on senior board, and hopefully you enjoy it. Thanks very much. So moving on now. Any disclosures of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest? Don't see any, so thank you. We'll move. Sorry, I should have checked. Are we rolling at the back? Thank you. Yes, we are being recorded and on YouTube. Public participation. I don't think we've got any questions from the public. No. Okay, thank you very much. So move on then to minutes of the previous board, which was on the 15th of March. If anybody got any comments, questions on this? So I'll propose from the chair that we accept them. I'll second that. Thank you, Councillor Jones. All those in favour? Thank you. All right. Your excuse. Any against? No, and an abstention. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I'll sign those as a true. Thank you. So we move on then to item 6, which is the budgetary control report, which you've got there. Hopefully you've got in front of you on 6.1 or page 9 of 164, depending on which one you're looking at. So are there any comments you want to make, Sue, on this, or is it Simon?
No, thank you, Chair. Not a great deal to the report. You'll see that we've just given you the position of actual spend against where we expected to be at the end of June. At the moment, we're looking quite good against the profile budget. That is thanks to some additional income we've had from Green Waste Service. So no issues at the moment, but clearly the position may change as we go forward, depending on how some of our income streams do pick up.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on that? No? Right, so the recommendation is that the report be noted and the board requests any further information if it feels it would assist in monitoring the budget under the board's control. Anybody happy to move that recommendation? Councillor Jones, seconded by Councillor Moss. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstention? Thank you, that's carried on. Thank you very much. And moving on to item 7, the leisure facility service improvement plan. And there you've got set out all the things that have been. And I would just like to introduce this myself by saying congratulations to the whole team for the way they responded to this particular lockdowns and COVID in January, and very quickly getting things online so that we did as much as we could to keep things going, even though we couldn't meet in person. And I just would like to convey my thanks and hopefully everybody's thanks to the team for that. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo what you've said and just noted, the excellent service that they provided through COVID I've spoke to many that took part in the classes that went on online, and especially some of them that said that it actually kept them sane, because going to these classes is normally where they have an hour away from the children. And they said it was something that they still continue to do. I mean, sometimes the children tried to take part as well, but they said at least it was something that they could look forward to.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'd echo those comments as well. And certainly, people I spoke to in my area were very grateful for the online service. In relation to the report, I was interested in the mentions of the app that's being developed. Can you confirm whether that's on schedule to be introduced at the end of this month? And also, is it being developed internally, or is it being purchased from a software developer?
Really good questions.
Chair, Russell's very eager behind you in the upright shot.
Chair. Yeah, so the Leisure app is currently live, downloadable on Google Play, I'm told, but on Apple it's not available yet. It should be available early August in the next 2 weeks. We have got a short video ready that shows you how it's used, what it's used for. So as soon as we've got everything ready, we'll share a link so you can download it if you want to. It's free to download. And the video that tells you a bit more about what it does. But ultimately, it should improve the booking experience for all members of all leisure sites. It should improve our communication. So any key messages, not just from leisure facilities, but community development or other areas, can be shared by push notification or through a web link on the app. And so it should improve our communication as well. So it's on Google Play now, but it's not until the developer side of it. So it's been purchased through our front of house system company, who are an app developer. We've also got like an app developer side to it. So we've created the app ourselves in terms of building it with the software that's been given to us through that.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. Any more comments or questions? Simon.
Well, just very briefly, Chair, if I may, one for clarification. Clearly, we're going to get into a discussion about Polesworth in a little while, but just for confirmation for the board, you'll recall that we circulated an email 6 weeks before the start of the school summer holidays. The school informed us that we wouldn't have access to Polesworth Sports Centre over the summer period because of demolition works being undertaken on site. Less than 2 weeks before the start of the school summer holiday, we were then informed that no, in actual fact, that demolition work wasn't taking place. So Polesworth Sports Centre is going to be open over the summer holiday period. So it's involved quite a lot of to-ing and fro-ing, but just so that the board is aware that that is the up-to-date position. Polesworth will be open over the school summer holidays. And the other thing, just for information, really, Chair, I came by some information about the visitor recovery rate in leisure facilities after the pandemic, looking at the May-June figures and how they compared with 2019. This was a national piece of data analysis. So we did some work on the local position. The national recovery rate was 53%. Comparing like for like, the local visitor recovery rate is currently standing at 60%. So Russell and his guys in the centres are clearly doing a good job on site. So just for your information.
Thanks. Councillor Hancock.
I was going to ask the question. You said that Polesworth Sports Centre will be open over the summer. However, the information that was sent out for classes and various other things were obviously excluding Polesworth Sports Centre because we thought it'd be closed. Will there be any leisure classes for children or anything happening during activities during the summer period, or did we miss the boat because obviously the notice came too late?
Russell John.
Through you, Chair. I'm not 100% sure. So we normally have top scoring over the summer. They were due to be in. They were then due to do some bits at QE and other areas. I'll confirm that after this meeting, if that's okay, whether we've managed to come back to part of our holidays, but maybe we have.
Right, thanks for a good question, and we'll look forward to being kept up to date on that. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. So the recommendation is that board notes and comments on the progress made, extra requirements, the leisure facilities improvement plan, in which operational performance is monitored. Another proposer for that, please. No, thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, awesome. And a second. Councillor Chambers, sorry. So proposed by Councillor Jordan, seconded by Councillor Chambers. And those in favour? And against? Thank you very much. Thank you. We can take to move on then to item 8, which is Bluefield Recreation Ground. This has been a long saga, but we're now getting through towards some sort of conclusion. So you've got all the information in front of you, but I'll just invite Simon if he's got any highlights he'd like to give us before we open the discussion.
Just very briefly through you, Chair. I mean, obviously the board is aware of the journey that we've been on, reference the improvement to the pitch and site security. We've also informed the board of the need to address this issue with ancillary accommodation. You can see a paragraph 3.6 or the table at the top of page 3, if you like, some of the eye-watering price implications of trying to solve that. And you only have £72,000 available to address this particular issue. And that looks like it's leading us to a renovation of the existing brick-built pavilion on the site. And paragraph 3.9 contains some suggestions from the structural engineer about how to address that. I'm seriously hoping that Richard is on the call, Mr. Dobbs, because the structural engineer, the preferred suggestion is that we need an internal reinforced raft slab so that the building can float on the soil. Well, if anybody's expecting me to answer the detailed technical questions on that, they're going to be waiting quite a long time. But the other issue is the tenancy at will. And this board is just asked to address the principle of entering into a tenancy at will with Grendon Football Club. The actual issue will be addressed and determined by the Resources Board. And if I can, there is, in terms of the draft attached to the board, there is actually a clause missing, and it's an important clause, and clearly we'll make sure that this is addressed with the Resources Board. But if I just can, 5.13.
This is, just to be clear, this is in the Appendix A.
Yes, yeah, the appended tenancy at will. The clause that is missing says the tenant acknowledges and agrees that the general public shall have the right of full access to the property in order to carry out any activity connected to the permitted use. And that is an important clause there. And the club is aware of that. And Evan Ross, who you will know, has been talking to them. But I thought it's important to make that clear to the board.
Oh, thank you. That's really helpful. Mr. Dobbs, do you want to come in at this stage and put some information in about the engineering works?
Absolutely not, Chair. That's what they in the trade they call a suicide pass. I'm no more au fait with exactly what a floating raft floor is than Simon. But I can furiously Google in the background if anybody really wants to know exactly what one of those is. But thanks for that, Chair, and thanks to Mr. Powell for that hospital pass.
My apologies.
Right, members. Thank you, Councillor Clues.
Again, Chair, I'd just like to say thank you to Simon and Richard's team and all the work that they're doing. And I think it's brilliant that North Warwickshire Borough Council is doing with, all these things, because it's like early Kings Football Club, early Dollar Sports Ground. I know the Addiston Sports Club, which we've been involved in as well. I think it's excellent work getting all these together, making sure that, all our children out there are getting the exercise that they need and helping each other.
Thank you.
Also, thanks Simon and his team as well. It's like I say, the state of the pitch beforehand was absolutely atrocious. And yes, we've got a decent piece of pound. That's something that we're proud of. Like I say, just now we're just going to look at the change of facility. So yeah, thank you, Simon.
I think just as a bit of background for those that perhaps haven't been on CNE board, the pitch was unplayable for about 5 years, wasn't it?
Oh, well, you mean when you shut down, you mean?
Yeah, when it shut down. It was uneven and, prone to breaking legs, which wasn't to be recommended. And the drainage was awful. So there were lots of problems that had to be addressed and have been addressed. So the pitch is now playable. And as you can see, what we're now looking at is the changing facilities. Councillor Phillips.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to make a lot of people so. I mean, it's a fine report, and I know the amount of hard work that goes into preparing this. It's just a shame that we need to get into a state where we're not giving away our assets, but sort of having to have to sort of do this. It's a shame we can't raise the funds ourselves. I mean, this is a vehicle for raising funds that we can't raise, and I've not been against it, but it would be nice if we were in a situation where we could have done this and we could have raised the funds and built facilities rather than having to have to, putting out, I'm not being derogatory, but putting out a tender and getting at least the community groups involved. We could have had more control and built something really quite nice. But I'm not trying to talk against it, but I'm just saying it's a shame that we can't do that.
Yeah, just to be clear though, the money's come from 106 payments.
Yeah, I know that, but I mean, we can't raise that sort of funding. It's a bit. I know what it's like when we've done the coastal thing. We can't raise that sort of funding. We have to go out to get funding in.
Yes, we do. But yeah, okay. Sorry, Councillor King.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow on from that comment. I mean, there's going to be quite a lot of development. There already has been around this area. The Section 106 agreement that describes what was the funding was used originally to restore the drainage scheme and the pitch improvement. Presumably there's been Section 106 monies associated with the new houses that were developed in Grendon and an expectation that there will be more Section 106 monies when about 600 more houses are built in that area. So I'm just wondering, this kind of rush to take it into a tenancy at will and the nature of tenancies at will, whilst they have been successful in enabling those organisations to raise funds, they have to be set up in such a way that they become long-term lease agreements of at least 10 years, is my understanding. So can Simon or someone clarify what that transition from a tenancy at will to a lease agreement, and we've had this with the Addison Football Club, if you recollect, that the sort of 1 year tenancy is not sufficient for them to raise the kinds of funds that are needed in terms of being substantial for what's needed in the way of renovation. Why are we going down this road right now, given the prospect of more Section 106 money? And also, I'm glad you clarified that there was a 513 addition to this tenancy agreement in draft, Simon, because obviously this informal use by the local community and the access issues, I wasn't quite sure I understood what that phrase was that you said was going to put in, but it didn't sound like anything specific to me in terms of guarantees to the local community that they would be able to walk and use and play on that area in the future. So,
yes, Tom.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yeah, it was obviously important that I clarified the situation regarding 513, and if I can just emphasise to the board that Grendon Football Club is absolutely aligned to that in the discussions that we've been having with the football club for the last 5 years and more, probably. Councillor Wright will clarify. That has always been their view, that they've never sought to preclude wider community use of the public recreation ground. I mean, the tenancy at will, if you like, is a little bit of a gateway, to see how things evolve and develop. It will allow the football club, picking up Councillor Phillips' point, to raise a certain amount of money to further improve the site, money that we don't have access to. So it will lead to further improvements on site. And then if North Warwickshire Borough Council is happy with and the football club is happy with the way that relationship has evolved, then we can talk about a longer term lease. And that clearly is what happened in the context of Hurley Kings Football Club at Hurley Door Mill. That happened, and they've gone on to a 25-year lease. And develop quite a grand clubhouse on that particular site. It's where we are with Addison Sports Club at Royal Meadow Drive, and it's given them the opportunity to raise funds and develop the playing pitches on that site in a way that the Borough Council couldn't afford to do. and it will allow Grendon to do it on this site. So it's a gateway that provides access to further resource. If all the relevant parties are happy with it, a little bit further down the line, whenever that is, we can start to talk about lease arrangements, but that would clearly come back to members of this authority to determine whether they wanted to go down that route or not. Clearly, the issue of further Section 106s, that's obviously to be negotiated, and if that opportunity arises, then clearly we'd be seeking to apply those Section 106 receipts if we're able to negotiate them. For those issues that are consistent with the priorities that you've got, whether that's in your leisure facility strategy, your green space strategy, your playing pitch strategy, local football facilities plan, those sort of things. It would be in accord with those priorities that have been set by the authority.
Councillor Hancock.
I have to put my support fully to the tenancy and will. I was a coach at Hurley Kings when we went through the process. Dormill was a run-down place that was hard to manage, the bushes and everything. They knew what they were stepping into, and Dormill now is the best football pitch in North Warwickshire by far. Clubs want to play there. Children want to go and play from Polesworth, Dordon. They will go to Hurley Kings, and actually it's affected Polesworth Swifts probably more in our villages because children will go to Hurley because of the facilities that are available. I think that managing football pitches is very hard, as we know from Polesworth Rec or any other places in our local villages. If we can get somebody to take that cost, keep improving them, so children and adults football, which are struggling for pitches as it is, can get that space and make it better, I think that it can only be good for the council and for the residents of the local area.
Absolutely. Actually, and I feel that, it's great that the community want to take control of their own facility and manage it. Obviously with our support at first, which is why we start with a tenancy at will, and we keep very close relationships with them to see if it's going to work, to see if they have got a business plan that's going to work out, and they take over the maintenance and stuff gradually and see if they can put themselves in a position where they can run the club entirely, because it's fantastic the community want to do these things. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, I do know they got to a certain point where there was 4 teams sharing a particular pitch, and then, of course, because Grendon was down the bottom of the pecking order, they ended up having a lot of games that fell on obviously the battle of the games that was falling into the actually played the end of the season on a Wednesday night. Well, a lot of the team got work commitments, so that they actually couldn't see the points, but now they've got playing facility now they can be proud of. So yeah.
I think it's something to be encouraged, and as we've said, I think just to repeat it really, particularly if it does go as far as a lease, which is another decision, not one we're taking tonight, but it does open all sorts of avenues of funding which are just not open to local authorities. They're just not. So they can get funding, they can improve the facilities for the whole community, and I think it's something that, if everything's right and all parties agree, something that we should look on favourably. But obviously that's a decision further down the line. But even with the tenancy at will, it gives them some opportunity to bring some funds in and to start seeing if they can run it themselves. So, I think it's something that we should applaud, that the community wants to do this. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that under a tenancy at will, even the lowest indicative cost that you've got there, it is almost impossible to apply for grants for that amount if you haven't got a 10-year lease agreement. And the case in point, like Hurley, that was not a tenancy at will that facilitated that. It was a 10-year secure lease agreement. So that was the point of my question. I did ask what had happened to the Section 106 money associated with the developments in Grendon, and why more hadn't been kind of released towards this from that pot. And I don't know whether you can answer that, Simon, or where else that money went, but there must have been some Section 106 money on, what was it, about 40, 50 houses in Grendon that have already been built there. But anyway.
Yeah, I think that's something we'll probably get information on. Of course, there's lots of demands on what Section 106 for leisure. First of all, there's lots of demands on 106 money for all sorts of things. And within the leisure package, there's lots of demands, and we have actually contributed a lot of money towards the, quite rightly, but towards this particular recreation facility. And it may be that there are other demands that we have to look at for the rest of the 106. I don't know the answer, but we can certainly find out. So that would be something we can circulate.
Chair, can I just ask one more thing? The phrase that you use for these missing 513. I'm afraid verbal assurances from football clubs, however nice and, you know, warm they have been, I do think we need something that is much more binding in terms of the current community access of this recreation. Because I know in other parts, not necessarily in this borough, where basically a big fence has gone up round and they're left with a narrow area to walk their dogs around, and it just becomes not a community recreation ground. I'm just saying, I think it needs to be legally tight, whatever the form takes. And I'm not sure that the phrases that you put in front of us in any way nailed anybody down, frankly.
Through you, Chair, obviously that wording has been checked by our own legal section, and they are confident about that. And the other thing that we can also share, I do now have a draft of the football club's development plan, so it needs a bit of tinkering with, but I'm happy to share that with the board as well, and that's got its commitments articulated in that too. But clearly, any tenancy at will that's approved through the resources board will have been cleared by the legal section, and I'm sure that
Claire's waiting to come in.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to add to what Simon said, that there is a provision in there which prevents any alterations being made, and in a tenancy at will you have perhaps greater leverage in terms of enforcing a provision like that, because there's not the protection that you would have under a long-term lease. So we would have a great amount of leverage to prevent them taking steps like that to fence off the pitch. And of course, in the final draft of any lease that might be entered into in the future, we will make sure there's a similar mechanism which limits what may and may not be done and allows appropriate access to the rest of the community.
Thank you very much. Sorry,
Just my
Councillor
last question on that. Now, obviously, I understand that we need to leave it as a community of, well, what protection will there be for the football pitch that has cost us a hell of a lot of money if we allow it to be used at all times of the year? I understand that we have to allow the community to use the area, but the main football pitch, what protection is there to make sure that the money that we spent is going to be protected? Because once it's torn up, that can be damaged for years. Unfortunately, that's just the way football pitches work. It's grass. So I'm like, obviously, I understand that we have to use it for community, but that main pitch, we need to somehow protect that from getting damaged, because that's what started at the old Until, when at first it just started to get damaged and deteriorated. So that would be something I would put forward, that the main pitch does have to be protected still.
Sorry.
Through you, Chair, just a couple of observations. It's one of the reasons why we've improved site security and the fencing on the site. There have been concerns in the past about quad bikes and things like that. So that issue about properly fencing the complete area itself, we've taken some measures there. We're also working in conjunction with environmental health and legal, looking at things like public space protection orders to protect the site in terms of dog walking and dog mess on the site and all this sort of business. And then another potential option, if there are problems and if we're concerned about that, and I have to say, you know, Councillor Wright might know better than I, but no immediate issues have been brought to my attention over the last few months. But if we start to have concerns about that, then we can look at the issue about just fencing off the football pitch itself. And that might be an issue where the football club is able to raise some funds, but that'll leave a substantial area for informal use by the community on that site. But those are issues that we can look at going forward.
That's all right.
I do know the intention of the team side. They've now got a reserve side, which they haven't had for many, many years, because the interest after the new pitch. But the idea is that they have a full-size adults pitch. They have two under, don't quote me on this, under 14s, under 12s pitch, but yeah, and there's little kiddies under 5s, under 6 pitch in the corner there. Now, if there's a section for dog walking, which I'm totally against, I'll come clear with that one, right? By the time you've allowed for the overrun, sliding tackles and things like that, you're going to shorten the pitch considerably. So that will mean one of the 3 pitches for the younger sides they'll no longer be there. They won't have that option. So
I think there's always a balance, isn't there? I mean, we want the community to have access Unfortunately, I mean, well, certainly we don't want quad bikes on the pitch. I think we can manage to protect it from that. But getting people who walk dogs to look after their dog mess and not leave it on the pitch is something that's quite an issue. So I think it's something that we'll be discussing as we go forward, because there is the issue that, you know, allowing enough playing space and allowing community access, and we just have to try and balance those things as best we can.
90% of the dog owners will be good dog owners. There'll be 10% that will always let the dog mess.
Yeah. We have that issue in other places too.
It's
Can I just draw the board back to 3.6 and the table? Because we are going to get, it won't be our decision, it will be a resources board decision, but we will put forward our recommendation. And part of the recommendation is that we say which of those options we would go for. I mean, it would be very nice to go to the first one, but we've been told that, you know, it's nice. We see all the options, then we're told how much money we've got. So we're sort of left with option 4. So when I read out the recommendations, I'm going to be implying that we're going for the renovation of the existing brick-built facility. So I just want to put that forward in case anyone wants to say something about that or object or whatever, but that is what I'll be implying in the recommendation. Because it's within the time, the cost envelope that we've got. Right, thank you. Are there any more comments, which case I'll go to the recommendations. So we're asked to note and comment on the progress, which I think we've done. That if the board's minded to improve the on-site ancillary accommodation, it determines the means by which it wishes officers to undertake this task. That's what I mean about option 4. That's what we would be recommending. And then commenting on the principle of the Borough Council entering into a short-term agreement with Grendon Football Club, through which it could assume responsibility for the management and maintenance of Bootville Recreation Ground prior to consideration of this matter at a future meeting of resource support. So again, that's a recommendation from us if we agree, rather than a decision. Can I have a proposer for that? You propose that motion? Councillor Hancock, seconder. Councillor Wright. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. Thank you. So we move on to item 9, which is the health and wellbeing working party minutes. And Councillor Chambers, were you at this meeting? Yes, you may be the only one here. So I just wanted to, first of all, say thank you very much to this working party for bringing up the killed and seriously injured on roads. And that was a key topic at the meeting, because that is one of the, if you like, KPIs, key performance indicators, that comes under health, although we don't have a lot of control over it. So the fact that this was looked at in detail is to be very lauded and with great thanks. So, Councillor McLeod first, and I'll bring you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just on item 7. I don't know if anybody can give me the update about, Russell said that 3 defibrillators across the leisure centres need new batteries and maintenance. Is this been done, or is it still being spoke about?
Yeah.
Do you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, the funds have been found through building maintenance. Through building maintenance. So that they're being looked at and addressed now. The batteries normally expire within a year, so that's still safe to use. But yeah, that'll be renewed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Chambers, have you got any comments or anything much to our attention?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a very good discussion about the killed and seriously injured on the roads, and Councillor Riley, I think, came and contributed through a virtual link, and basically pointed out that of the, I think it was 7 worst junctions where it's killed and seriously injured persons, at least 6 of those were in were in North Warwickshire, but the only junction that had anything done to it was in Warwick.
Yes.
Or Leamington, I can't remember. So
Not in North Warwickshire.
Not in North Warwickshire, and obviously he's trying his best at the county level to keep banging the drum about the very bad and unchanging record that we have as a district in relation to children seriously injured. And I think, you know, as reflected here, just we need to raise it from that working group into the Community Environment Board, and to keep our eyes on that in terms of an issue that has to feature in our local transport plan and in the county's transport plan. The days of having targets for reducing these accidents, killed and seriously injured, seems to, and where directors are held to account for if they achieve them, seems to have gone. So all that we can do is try and influence and raise it wherever we can. The Health and Wellbeing Action Plan, the Health and Wellbeing group has a very small budget. I think it's about £6,000 in total, something like that. And this is relevant to the discussion about the defibrillators. And one of the things that they had tried to do in the past was commission a small clinic to run for sexual health in Atherstone, and to describe what had happened with that and with what was happening in sexual health in North Warwickshire and the service that were there, because we certainly did have one of the highest rates of teenage pregnancy in the county, particularly in Atherstone, that there was this idea of open access drop-in sexual health services from a health clinic. Basically, that has now ceased in terms of provision. It never really got off the ground to the extent that we had hoped. It was clear from the way in which this lady, Helen Miller, was talking that many of the more specialist kind of interventions that now are on offer for sexual health contraception services is based at the George Eliot. I think we raised a question about how that's accessed and how it gets known about. I think she was going to go back and have a look at that, because clearly, if you know about those services and can ring in, do you actually access them? There's a question of this unmet need potentially that's still out there that we were trying to meet through that investment. We have been trying, through Margaret's leadership, actually to find out about what's happening with air quality in the borough. It's really very difficult to get some engagement at the current time from our environmental health colleagues, because they are so horrendously busy with the pandemic, and also they're short-staffed. I think they've lost at least one member of staff, so we're no further forward on that. So we haven't had a chance to consider in depth the 2019/20 report that's been sent to DEFRA, but we will come back to that. And on the defibrillators, we were being asked with this small budget to fund the replacement of these defibrillators, and it was felt that the money would be found and that we had a very tight budget anyway that we weren't prepared to. And I think you were tasked, weren't you, because it was very much your budget responsibility for this area, Councillor Bell, to have a discussion about that. I think that's probably it in terms of the work that's been done.
Thank you. Sorry to drop you in.
No, that's all right.
That's very good. Thank you very much. Yes, we will take up the baton on the KSIs, I think, and put it on a future Community Environment Board, and thank the Health and Wellbeing Working Party for their work and their recommendation that this comes forward. So we will indeed do that. And I am very concerned about the changes in the sexual health drop-in centre in North Warwickshire. I think it was informal, it was what was needed. People could be referred to the George Eliot if necessary. I think we need a step before that. And I will be following this up at the county as well, but I think we need to keep on that one. Thanks to the Working Party for doing that, and also encouraging them to carry on with the air quality when the environmental health officers are in a position to respond. That will be really good. So thanks very much.
I'll just raise one more question. Yeah. When we had the discussion about the defibrillator, I think Russell presented a huge list of the defibrillators that are now out there that have been raised through charitable fundraising and parish councils and so on. and it was far greater than we've actually got responsibility for as a borough. What was it, about 60 defibrillators you'd unearthed in terms of the list?
Yeah.
But there is the potential of what happens when these defibrillators is who's going to replace them, what's their life expectancy, where does that organisation called First Responders come in terms of training? And, you know, you have to kind of begin to ask, well, has the investment that's been made with taxpayers' money in this area, has it been valued for money, I guess, in terms of all the things that are out there? And I don't know whether Russell, sorry, through you, Chair, you want to comment on that?
I'll just say, do we get, when people want to fund the defibrillator, do we have something we give them that say, remember, this has got to be maintained?
Through Chair, Emma Cobb did the more extensive list of research, so I'm not sure of the details. I can find out the detail of it from her. Do you have any more?
So through you, Chair, there are 6 or 7, I can't remember off the top of my head, that are attached to buildings that are owned by the Borough Council.
Yes.
And we have been, as part of the service level agreement with First Responders, negotiating with them to take over the responsibility for the maintenance, the provision of batteries when that's required, after 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it happens to be, replacement pads when the defibrillators themselves are used. So that issue is being dealt with, and First Responders will be responsible for those batteries and replacement pads and that sort of thing going forward.
Yes, and that's, sorry, Chair, it wasn't so much the ones that are attached to our buildings, it was all the others that are out there in the community with expectations around them in terms of.
Yeah, through you, Chair, we would need to check with Emma Cobb.
It was about 60 or 70.
All right.
It might be worth looking into that and see if we do provide at least any advice. We don't want to discourage people from fundraising and providing them, but they just need to know the ongoing, responsibility, if you like, to these. So obviously it's battery life, and as you say, if they've been used, you need to replace the pads. So, and I'm not sure what the life expectancy is, but perhaps we could look into that and see if through Emma we could do something to support people with defibrillators that aren't ours. Thank you. Right, thank you. We just accept those minutes, we don't need to vote on that. So thank you. And so moving on then to item 10, which is the progress report on achievement of the corporate plan and performance indicators. Before we go into stuff, can I just say that we can't read whether it's red, green or whatever. First of all, it's in monochrome. So, and I know you write the words on, but the colour's so dark you can't tell what the words say. So we don't know whether it's red, green or amber. So it might be better to leave them white and just put the word on so we can actually read them, or some other solution that makes it easier for us to know at a glance whether.
I think it said we can't read them, Chair.
So thank you. Just make that point at the beginning. Are there any questions or comments from members on this report for those of you that can't read it and understand it? Councillor. Yeah.
I just want to thank you, Chair, just reinforce what you were just saying yourself. I had some new reading glasses. I still haven't been able to read the first 2 pages of this report. The later ones are okay, but the first 2 I really struggled with. The second one, apart from not being able to read the colours, I couldn't actually. It was giving me a headache trying to read the words.
Yeah, so it's not just the colours; it's the size of the text as well. So yes, so it would be good if you could get that so that you can actually read it. So perhaps it's best. Nobody's got any comments. It's best to draw a veil over this report. We'll just actually consider it. So I'm sure it'll come back to us in the future in a more readable form. So.
Chairman, it's okay online. You can see the colours.
Yes, you can see it online. I think that's what's happened now. We've moved back to paper copies. I think we're finding it a bit tricky. So thank you very much. So we're asked to consider the performance achievement and highlight any areas for further investigation. So we've highlighted the area of readability. So if members are happy to accept that, I'll just recommend that propose that from the chair.
Move it, Chair.
Thank you. Well, if you second that from Councillor Jones, thank you. And for those in favour of just accepting, thank you. And those against? Yes, they. Thank you. So we move on to item 11. Just got the data on the green bin service, and you can see a lot of data in there. Have you got any points you want to highlight, Mr. Dodd?
Not really, Chair. Thank you. Hopefully the report's pretty clear, but obviously if anybody's got any questions or they want any further detail, I can either answer it now or find out and get back to members.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members on this? You can see it's really more income than we expected. Councillor Chambers.
Yes, I mean, obviously it's only been running, was it 2 months, is that right? If we started the charging in April 2021. Yeah. So it's difficult to interpret, if you like, what the overall pattern and take-up is going to be. But we did note in paragraph 3.5 that take-up rate was 55% of all households in the borough, but when you take into account those without gardens, it's 60%. I'm just wondering, Richard, whether there's any sort of point at which you're aiming for to get the take-up of the green waste bins in terms of making good this discretionary service and the expenditure that we were making on it, whether there's some sort of goal of, I don't know, 80 or 90%, and what's your sense of most people, if they're going to do it, they do it in the first wave, don't they, of it coming on stream, whether you think we're falling in line with what you were expecting. And then the question is on 753, that no signs that green waste are being placed in the black bins to any great extent. And certainly, I mean, I imagine that varies by area, because certainly people have said to me that my guy next door is just putting his green waste in the black bins, and that's it basically as far as they're concerned. I just wondered how what a sign means and what the evidence is that you've got for that statement.
Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, taking the second point first, I mean, as Councillor Chambers pointed out at the start there, we have only got a couple of months worth of data here, so I'm not overly keen to extrapolate too much in terms of hard facts, particularly in terms of behaviour. There is some information in the table at 5.2, which goes to show that things like residual waste levels are very similar, and green waste levels again are similar to periods in previous years, which seems to suggest both that we're picking up the green waste, largely through those who are subscribing, and the residual waste that's left is not seeing a huge hike because amounts of green waste are being diverted from the green bin and into the black bin. But members will be aware that obviously green waste is seasonal, and therefore it's difficult, particularly on only a couple of months, to compare one year with previous years. But so far, I would say the signs are good, that the service is being followed, and that people are being are putting the right waste in the right bins. And obviously, we will continue to monitor this, and we'll continue to come back to board to let you know what the emerging picture is in terms of any changes to those figures. So I'll certainly keep the board informed of those things. In terms of what sort of rate were we looking at, what sort of rate is is a strong performance and is sort of capturing the numbers of residents we hope for. Well, we did, as Councillor Chambers said, think that 55% would represent good performance, particularly in North Warwickshire, which has not as many large gardens as some other parts of the borough, or some other parts of the county. I mean, for comparison, we think we've got about 60% of all households, or all eligible households, shall we say. Stratford have hit 72%, but you can probably appreciate that the demographics of Stratford and the geography of Stratford is a little bit different to North Warwickshire. And people are still subscribing. We are still getting, as of last week, I think we were still getting around 75 permits a week still being sold. So it's still the case that people are still signing up to the service. So again, It's difficult to know exactly where we'll get to. I'm very pleased that we've got to 55% in terms of overall performance. Anything in addition to that is a bonus. If we can hit 60%, that represents excellent performance. And in terms of cost of delivering the service versus income, in terms of the cost of the scheme to administer, and the cost of the scheme to operate, it's probably just about washing its face at the moment. What we're getting in probably covers the cost of running the subscription and the service itself, which is a pretty healthy position to be in.
Okay. Anyone else? Any comments? Right, thank you very much. We're asked to just note the contents of the report. I'm happy to do that. I recommend that from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Moss, thank you. Those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Unanimous. Thank you very much. So we now move on to item 12, I say smiling, because it's a really important report, but quite complex. And I know that Richard can make it very easy for us to understand. So this is the National Waste Strategy and our consultation responses. So if we could just pick out the key points of this and our issues about it, that would be very helpful, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, there's an awful lot to digest in this. And unfortunately, the timing is such that there hasn't been the opportunity for board to consider this before giving our response. But we have tried, as you know, to make sure that officers are being given a good go at it, and that members have been involved through the Warwickshire Waste Partnership and through the various stakeholder chairs of boards and representatives of local authorities have the chance to run the rule over it before those responses have been sent back to government. Just in a nutshell, and I won't take too much time on this because I could talk for hours, and none of you will be any the wiser, I'm sure. But it essentially covers three areas of consultation, and this is the second round of consultation that there's been on this, and we have given a response previously, and members have been giving information on that in the past as well. But the three areas that the government are looking at is extended producer responsibility, which covers the recycling of packaging. And that is essentially that manufacturers of packaging or brand owners of packaging should be the ones who pay for the recycling of that packaging. And there's a whole host of suggestions being put forward, most of which I think the local government sector agrees with the main principles being that either packaging is reduced or packaging is made much more recyclable, but in any event, any costs that are involved with local authorities dealing with them are met by manufacturers. So that's the prime thing behind extended producer responsibility, but there's a little bit more detail in there if anybody wants any more information or questions on that. Deposit return schemes are linked to that. This very much is a hark to the past. I'm sure some members will remember the days when you paid a couple of pence on the cost of a bottle, and you could take it back to the shop and get your money back. It's effectively the new version of that. And again, the government is consulting on the extent to which packaging, particularly drinks packaging, is subject to a deposit on purchase, and then subject to how that will be retrieved by retailers, and that the money will be returned to householders. There's obviously quite a lot to unpick on that, but essentially our response to that has been that we think that this is for on the go. So those sort of containers that are small enough, and then the intention is that you purchase them to take it out and about with you, because we very much think that it contributes to a significant amount of littering, and the deposit return scheme will go a long way towards tackling that, whilst at the same time balancing the fact that this actually puts on quite a lot of expense to the shops, to the weekly shop of the average household, and there therefore needs to be a balance on that as well. So that's largely what our response to that has been. The third area of consultation, and one I think there probably is going to be more questions and interests about from the board, is around consistency of collections, and that where the government is asking whether It thinks that regular collections of food waste from every household in the country should be introduced, whether garden waste collection should be made free, whether there should be a minimum frequency of residual bins being emptied, whether there should be a consistency of material that is collected from every household in the country, and also to a certain extent whether source separation, as it's called, where householders place different materials in different containers at the curbside for collection, should be encouraged. You'll see in our responses that, particularly on that last point, we're very much not in favour of that for any number of reasons. Not least of which most of Warwickshire has moved away from curbside sort. The last one is Warwick, and Warwick is about to move away from curbside sort. Every time we've changed from a curbside sort system to commingled, we've seen an increase in the amount of material that's been collected for recycling. And of course, we're at the start of building a brand new facility that will produce better qualities and more waste than even curbside sort does. So we very much see the future as being commingled because it's easier for the householder. It's safer for the operative from a health and safety perspective. There are real question marks, I think, with how most households would store half a dozen different containers, and also for those who are disabled or infirm or have other problems about how they would decide and know which container to put which material in and how they would again get those out to the curbside. So I think there's a number of questions around that. There are also questions around exactly what new burdens money would come forward if any of these are introduced, particularly around food waste collections and the potential that garden waste collections would become free of charge again. There are some real concerns about that, and also the suggestion that garden waste collections, for example, only need to be provided during the growing season. Operationally, that causes a huge problem for those of us who provide garden waste collection services, because we don't just provide them during the garden through the growing season. If that's meant to be the spring and the summer, it's an all year round service, as members know. So, having said I'll be brief, I've waffled on, but clearly I'll answer any questions that members might have. Thank you, Chair.
Not to take in members, but if you've got questions, please bring them forward now. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if I caught all of that, or if I might have missed something. If I did, I apologise if I'm asking something that's already been covered. I'm not quite clear on what the reservations are about the different sizes in relation to the scheme. Why there are reservations about the larger containers?
Yes. Well, essentially, at the moment, all our householders put all their recyclable material in one container, and that's the same throughout the whole of, well, through most of the country, to be honest, certainly through the whole of Warwickshire, with the exception of Warwick. There is some suggestion within the consultation that the preferred method of recycling would be for smaller containers, half a dozen, say, to be provided to each household, that would then put separate materials in each one. So paper in one, cans in another, glass in another, plastics in another, cardboard in another potentially, and that those different containers will then be put out at the curbside and the curbside sort, so that you do the pre-sorting as a householder, and that then that's collected by the collection crews. Now, clearly that is completely at odds with what we do at the moment. It's completely at odds with what 80% of the country does at the moment. It's not the infrastructure that and the way that collections are set up. And therefore, we've got some significant reservations about it. It is not the way our strategy in Warwickshire and elsewhere is heading. It has been shown to reduce the amount of waste that's collected for recycling. I think it's confusing for the householder and very difficult for certain members for certain households to actually comply with. And we would have to have a whole new fleet across the whole of Warwickshire and the sub-region of vehicles, more vehicles doing more miles, to collect this waste, and we think that's got there's a number of reasons why that's difficult, not least of which the climate change effect of having far more vehicles on the road doing this sort of thing. So we think very much it's a step in the wrong direction, and we're demonstrating through the MRF that we're building that actually we can get a better quality of material and more of it through modern sorting techniques centrally than by asking the householder to do it at the curbside. So that's our.
Richard, sorry to interrupt. I'll let you go on because it was important that we heard that. But I think the question was actually about the deposit. And
sorry, Sorry, Chair. Yes. Okay. Sorry about that. Sorry.
No,
Chair.
because that
Thank
was
you, Chair.
important to
So having been evangelical about the wrong question, I'll be evangelical about the right question. Yeah, the choice for on the go or all in, as it's called. So this is the question of deposit return schemes. So on the go is essentially under 70 centilitres, so anything smaller than a wine bottle effectively will be on the go. Anything above that, so anything that whose job it is to contain things like drinks, will be included in an all-in scheme. And the reason for the distinction and the reason for going for on the go is that on the go material, it tends to be the stuff that's littered. So it's the things that people take to parks and when they're out and about, it's the things that are left behind on the streets and in parks and that sort of thing. Larger things like 1 litre, 1.5 litre bottles of pop or whatever, it tend to be things that are bought for consumption in the home, and there's a perfectly adequate recycling system for dealing with those. Those on the whole don't tend to be the sort of material that's left out and about on the street, in parks, that sort of thing. So I think but of course, if you've got to pay a deposit on every single item that you buy, for the average household, that adds a certain, quite a lot more to their weekly shop, albeit there is a mechanism for them to get that money back. But if every single drinks container you're purchasing when you go out and do your weekly shop has a deposit on it, then that has the chance to be quite a significant addition to the cost of the weekly shop. So that was the reason for the distinction between on the go, sort of sub 70 centilitre, and all in, which is everything essentially, and we thought it was important to make that distinction. Hopefully that's answered the question that was asked rather than the question that Councillor Jens didn't ask.
Thank you. Thank you for both. Thank you for both. I do understand that.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions. I wanted to ask 1 question if he had answered Andy's question different. So when you said about this new recycling thing, what's going to happen to the older houses? And we've got quite a few streets in Atherstone, as you know, Richard, where 4 houses share an entry, and we've had complaints about them leaving the bins out from 1 week to the next. So when you're talking about a box for this and a box for that and a box for something else, how are they going to cope in those? And the second question is about these recycling things for the bottles. How are the really small shops going to cope with it? Because I know there's one shop close up to where I live where the only place he'd be able to put a recycling thing would be outside his shop.
Yeah, I think those are both very good points. I mean, I think the answer to the first question is obviously we don't want it to happen, and therefore, the way of solving that problem is to not allow it to happen in the first place. Regardless, I think, of what the government finally settles on in terms of consistency of collections and curbside sort and co-mingling of recyclables, there will be the opportunity for councils to demonstrate through what's called a TEEP assessment, which is a technical, environmental, economical and practicability assessment, to demonstrate actually that the methods they're employing, if they are different to what is ultimately recommended, will still be able to be used. And I think we've got an incredibly strong argument that the way we do things at the moment, particularly once we're moving into our new MRF or SMRF, as I think others are calling it, we can demonstrate that actually fulfills all of those technical, environment, economic and practicability requirements to demonstrate that we need to carry on doing what we're doing at the moment. So regardless of, I think, of what route the government finally settles on, we will be able to carry on doing what we're doing because it is the most sensible way of doing it for us in Warwickshire. So I think that's the answer to that. In terms of reverse vending machines, I think that they're called, which is the way that a lot of shopkeepers will probably run their take back schemes. You put your bottle back into a machine and it issues either money or a voucher or tops your credit card up or whatever. I think that's one of the ways that it will be encouraged. The other way will simply be to take them back in at the counter and hand over the money and store them out the back. If that's the way that small shopkeepers are going to do it, then they'll need a lot of support from local authorities, I think, to help them with their trade collections to enable them to do that. We stand ready to do that and to help local retailers of any size with that. And it's also formed part of our modelling for the new SMRF that we will be able to take material from deposit return schemes, both large and small, through our facility, and we'll very much be talking to retailers large and small about the opportunities to allow them to work with us on that. So we think there are solutions there, but for small for small retailers, they're going to have to get the stuff out the back quickly. They can't store it for days and weeks at a time. They simply won't have the space. So we'll have to help with that.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Richard, I'd just like one question about what are the implications of separate food waste collections for us if that were to come in?
The main implication is one of cost. We'd have to set up entirely new rounds, I think, certainly to start with. There are two ways of doing it. You either set up entirely new rounds to collect them. Obviously, that has expense. There is potentially the confusion that it leads to as well, but it's manageable. But it's again yet another container and yet another frequency of collection and yet another the thing that householders will have to get used to. The other way of doing it is to put pods, separate collection containers on each collection vehicle. You can only obviously do that when you renew your fleet. So there are exemptions or a pushing out of the timescale envisaged within the consultation to allow different authorities to move at different paces depending on what they've got in place at the moment and what they need to put in place. So they would allow us a bit of time, hopefully, to get to a point where we could settle on the best way of doing it. But in any event, it's going to be more expense. It's going to be either more vehicles or more expensive vehicles. It's certainly going to be more staff, to crew those vehicles and to collect all the separate waste. There's potentially more expense to get rid of it. We're working with our colleagues at the County Council about what contracts they'd need in place to get the right material to the right places for treatment and onward disposal. So all of that would need to be sorted out. It's all doable. There's a cost involved, and the thing that we're really interested in is when that becomes a new burden, whether the government will pay all of the costs for in perpetuity of providing that sort of service. We remain to be convinced, that's the case. And the difficulty, of course, is that different things cost different amounts in different areas. And we can't accept a government picking a one-size-fits-all solution to cost. It really will need to be on a case-by-case basis, because clearly it's far more difficult and expensive to do it in a rural area like North Warwickshire than it is to do it in the middle of a town. Where you've got a fairly captive audience. So we'll see, but that's the challenge there, I think, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thanks for all the work on this. This has been a huge amount of work, and I know a lot of it's through the Waste Partnership. That's with the county, and all the district authorities across the county have worked together on this. And I think you can see the combined responses which we've got in front of us in the report. So if there are no more comments or questions, we're just asked to note the contents of the report. Can I have a proposal, please, for that? Councillor Jordan, and thank you, Councillor Chambers, for the second batch. Thank you very much. Thank you. So those in favour? Against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. So we'll move on then to item 13. And this is a recommendation for the board under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972. The public interest be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined by Schedule 12A in the Act. And there we have information which is likely to reveal the identity of an individual. Yes.
I was moving. Sorry, I was
moved by Councillor Ross, seconded by Councillor Jordan. Those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye. Thank you.